I'm Richard Hoyt from Oskaloosa, Iowa.
All right.
Drove down here for Sun and Fun and made an appointment with Jan and Alyssa to put the engine in after Sun and Fun.
We spent some time together, didn't we?
Yes, we did. We've been here about a week, I think, putting this motor in, or excuse me, engine in, and got it started up today about 5 o'clock. I can't hardly wait to get the wings on it and get the tail going. So I'm going to stop at Zenith on my way home and pick up the tail. And hopefully this fall we'll have the first flight.
And maybe even do it at the same time as we do the homecoming at Zenith.
Yes.
Yeah. If everything gets done and we get airworthiness and a weight and balance and all that, we can do it.
Yep, I hope so. That's a lot of ground to cover.
And now where are you headed, sir?
I am headed home. I'm gonna go to the hotel and get up real early in the morning. I got 1,300 miles to go, and I hope to be home Wednesday morning.
All right. Well, thanks again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Jan. You did an outstanding job. I couldn't have done it without you.
This is the finished airplane, and we're gonna see what she does when we go vroom vroom. No propeller yet, but we can turn some power on and see if she starts. We don't have fuel actually because I disconnected all that, but there it is, running engine. Turned out beautiful. We are going to talk about the fuel system. Obviously, our design philosophy is try to simplify. This is a 701, so it's going to be around the pattern a lot, just having fun. So we're not thinking along the same lines as with the big cross-country airplanes, even though, of course, you can go cross-country with this as well. But we wanted a mini header tank to save weight and overall simplicity of a fun airplane. So let's just start up front and we'll work our way towards the back. In the front here is the high pressure pump for the direct injection. We're using a section of the original hose because it has a check valve assembly built into it, which we need so that we don't get pulses in the fuel line on our instrumentation as we're flying. We want to see a steady 40 to 50 psi. A lot of times we would run this hose right here and underneath along with all the other wiring and stuff that we have underneath here, but it lent itself on this airplane not to do that. So we went down here, we did a dual splice here, a brass coupler with dual Oetikers, and that goes from the original to the high pressure Gates fuel injection hose. And then we followed the engine mount and we popped the grommet right here in the firewall and we went into the airplane. From there, we have the fuel line kind of just laying here for now. Of course, there'll be carpeting, we can put a little loom on it and so forth, but we're just running it here in this corner until we get another grommet right here. Now, after this, we decided to kind of bend in a little bit. The seat pan gives us that room, so you have at least this much room right here. So we have enough there to cross over without tangling up with our rudder cable. Now, from there, we are in what we affectionately call the hellhole, which is actually really, really nice on the 701 in the sense that you can take a stool and you can sit here and you can work all day. Everything back here is actually very accessible and very easy to get to. Keep in mind, like when you're doing servicing, make it easy so that you can disconnect cables in the back. The rudder cables won't be a problem in this airplane, but you might have some elevator stuff going through here, I'm not sure. But you want to disconnect so that you can very easily sit here and service your airplane. So back to the fuel system. So the fuel line now came right through there, another grommet here, and yet another grommet up here. And then we pop right into our fuel check valve assembly that we call it. And here we mounted it right to this baggage bulkhead stiffener. Very convenient and a direct shot from the front. Notice we don't have a high pressure fuel filter anymore. We have simplified and we don't use it anymore because we're going to have filters before we go into the header tank from the wings that we can change as often as we want to keep our fuel clean. In addition, that we have filters on these upright tanks that are larger internal filters here. So with a new O-ring set once in a while, you can pop the pump out and put a new filter in there. And even easier, leaving those alone for several years, and you just keep changing the filters from the wings that feed this tank at the bottom here. So follow the line and back to the check valve assembly. So this is going to the engine. We just follow that hose. This will be for the pressure transducer that will tell the pilot how much fuel pressure is prior to the high pressure system on the engine. Basically your pump pressure when the pumps are on. Should run 40 to 50 psi. Here is a little orifice, 10 thousandths, and that guy is only there to bleed off a little bit of fuel back down to the low pressure side. I just put a T here where the gravity feed comes in from the left tank and the right tank. And then I can gravity feed a little bit of fuel out of the system after the engine shuts down, so I don't carry all this pressure in the lines when the airplane is parked. Here we have one-way check valve this way and this way, so it can't backfeed into the other pump. There are already check valves in the pumps, but we back up on those with these brass check valves. If you ever have a strange scenario where you cannot build pressure during your initial startup or something, then just verify that these are okay. Take them apart, look inside. There should be a little snapping in there and all that. But once they're working, they're working. Never had a problem with that. Now from there, we have a nice gentle curve on these hoses, and we make sure that that it's exactly the right length so that these fittings, the snap-on fittings here, are not bound up and they just kind of lay in a natural where they want to be, so there's no, like, you're not pushing them to the side or anything, because those are O-ring sealed. We ended up using 90s here, as you see, 90 and a 90. I was trying first with the straights, but too much bend on the hose. 90s was just absolutely perfect. We did build up the tank with, hardware store stuff, but it works. But basically a 90 and a 90 and single barb, and the same here. Because of the way that the tank sits, it will be easier to run the fuel just straight down from the tanks here. Obviously, once this airplane's completed, I understand there's a passage here for fuel hoses. If they end up coming down here, and they're coming, more of a gradual this way, these could be just eliminate this and just a straight barb in here and here. So that's something that you can fine tune once the wings are on and you're actually running feed lines to here and to here through the fuel filters. Made up this little bracket here in order to support the tank from underneath, and we have the same in the front. Made a little bracket there to support the tank from the aft. So put a screw in the tank first and then bend that angle. I think it was like, 15 degrees or something. It's very little to go from horizontal to the slanted floor. We put a couple of screws on the bottom, and that holds the tank in the back. Now, after that was done, we kind of just went in and put our hand on this large panel. Of course, we're supporting the tank on this forward stiffener, and we found that there was no reason for a stiffener crosswise further aft, but we did add one fore and aft because that took away any kind of buckling of the skin in that direction when we move the tank. So now, even with a very simple setup, it's very sturdy. We used about 1 inch or so of extension for our drain. Could be even shorter if you're concerned about looks, but it's a utilitarian plane, utility plane, so we have a functional and nice drain at the bottom of that header tank. Plenty of clearance around the hole in case the tank ever moves. We don't have any binding or cutting or chafing against the skin or possible bending of the or creating a fuel leak in the drain. Now, we also need to get air out of the tank. As we see, feed, but how about all this air that's in this tank? We have to vent it back to the wing tank, so we need feed hose 5/16 and a vent hose 5/16 to each wing. It's not super critical that it goes to both wings, but for redundancy, like we do in a lot of things, we have two. We have one here and one here, so that those just go back to the high side of the wing out by the fuel caps. Most of the newer planes have vent bungs in that area. They're actually return fuel bungs for fuel injected engines, but for the Viking engine, since we don't have return fuel, it all happens inside this tank. The same fittings on the tanks are used for the venting rather than fuel return. And that takes care of this. And then we added this is more into the electrical now, but we took all the wires from the pumps, the pigtails, and they were long enough to just go to a little bus bar right here. And we'll cover that in wiring. Other than that, fuel system's very straightforward. It's a very small, lightweight tank. We're very happy with it. Rather than having a gascolator somewhere and a mechanical pump somewhere and a little facet pump somewhere, or maybe two of them, and all this kind of stuff, and a fuel valve, we just have this one little place where everything happens. We got the pumps, we got the drain, we got the check valves, we have the filters. Everything is in this one spot, and it's outside of the airplane. Very good. That covers the fuel system. Let's get to another chapter. How about electrical? We need some electricity to make all this work, so this will be the electrical chapter. Now, as you can see, there's an opening in the back. The 701 traditionally always had an opening in the back. Roger's airplane, Roger Dubert at Zenith, has an opening in the back, but it's underneath. The drawing shows to put it underneath. We decided, I don't want to work upside down. So we made a structural panel, and we framed it all out, and we put the opening right here. And we're making it, situating it, so we're clearing this stringer right here. Make sure you clear that. Make sure you clear this. We did pop a couple of extra holes in here for the rivets, actually on the cover. So when we put the cover on, these rivets don't interfere with our cover. But let's take a look at the cover in a second. All right, so that's the opening. If you look at it very carefully when you're about to do this, you can see we got about 1/2 inch here. We are about 3/4 from this stringer. The stringer actually comes out and faces this way, so the web of the stringer is forward. Make sure your airplane's the same. And so it's the width of the stringer basically here. This is double because of that. And like I said, we cleared back here, and I would say we're about 1/4 inch from, so the web of the stringer, and this one's here, so we're about 1/4 inch there. So make a paper template, lay it all out nice, and carefully cut your opening gradually larger and larger. Once you have that done, grab a 1/8 inch aluminum plate, 1 foot by 1 foot. You can get that, you don't even have to cut it, just order it from McMaster-Carr and get yourself, just put that in there. There you can see it. And rivet it with the existing rivets to the forward stiffener here. And then add another stiffener. We got one that's a little bit beefier than the Zenith angles, and we put that one back here, and it's just a little bit beefier. It's 16 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. So then we put that underneath and riveted across that as well. So we added that just to get a little bit more stiffness. And then the battery, this nice 1200 series battery is the same type of battery Odyssey as we use on the dual battery systems. Remember I said this airplane's utilitarian, we stay kind of local and sometimes we go cross country, but mostly we're just having fun. So we don't want the extra complexity of dual batteries and switches and things like that. We just want one big battery that's going to do what we want. And we also want to be offsetting that 140 horsepower turbocharged engine with some weight in the back. And we wanted to do that in a clean way that makes sense. So that's what we got. Now the battery hold-on tray also is available, and we didn't use the base of it. We used the 12 by 12 by 1/8 inch plate instead. Then the battery tray comes with a stainless steel bolt assembly. We put that up from the bottom. So you can see that right here. So that holds the whole battery. It can't tear through because we have all those rivets holding the 12 inch by 12 inch plate, 1/8 inch thick. And then we have the stainless steel pieces here that hold the battery tray, which holds the battery. So it's very, very secure. That explains how we did the actual installation of the battery. And now let's move on to, or the battery installation. Now let's move on to wiring of the battery. We ended up running a conduit right here. You can use this Apex tubing or whatever it's called in Home Depot and save a little bit of weight. We had some lightweight aluminum we used. Put a little bracket and an Adel clamp here, a little 90-degree bracket. And then we ran our big 6-gauge, for us anyhow, 6-gauge cable through that. We also could have run our ground cable through that, which we only used a 10-gauge ground cable. And we ended up already installing that, and we made some grommets and we ran that ahead of time. But afterwards we thought, well, we could have just as well used the same conduit and ran that as well. So how can we get away with just a 10-gauge ground and save a little bit of weight? Well, there's pros and cons to everything, and one of them is people say, well, you know, you should have a clean ground. You shouldn't use the airframe as a ground for your avionics and stuff. And we have completed that. We have done that. We ran a 10 gauge for our avionics. This goes to the grounding bus in the front that powers everything in the airplane. It's the ground for everything in the airplane, your lights, your radios, your flashers, your whatever. And then we have a 6 gauge, and we grounded it to the airframe right here. So between that ground and the firewall ground of the engine, we have a lot of continuity for one purpose only, and that's just to start the engine. That's the only time we're drawing that kind of current in an airplane. So we're helping out with the grounding of the airframe just during cranking, and it cranks like crazy. That's working excellent. Let's move forward from that, and let's take another look in the hellhole here and see if we can see any wiring, because this channel or this chapter is about wiring. All right, so yeah, here you can see our conduit that we put in. Put a clamp here, put a clamp back there, and that just holds it. It's very simple. And you can get this lightweight plastic tubing if you want to. And we kind of just ended it right about here. And had another clamp, like I said, right there. And you could have run the ground, like I talked about, inside that. We had already run it through some grommets. Now, this is about wiring, so let's continue with wiring. Our heavy-duty cable comes out here, and we are running. We were scared about running it through the tunnel here because there's going to be an elevator control in here, and it swings back and forth in the front. So we just wanted to stay clear of the controls. It's probably possible to run it through here, and a little grommet in the corner up front there, I imagine, if you're very careful and you have the controls in and you can test it. So I think that's probably possible. But we ended up electing to go underneath the seat, and we'll go in front of the seat and take a look at that in a second. The other wiring that was done that's engine related back here, we touched on earlier, is the header tank. So we have 2 fuel pumps. So there are 2 grounds, black ones coming in here, and 2 positives, 1 for each pump. So 4 wires, positive, negative, positive, negative. The way you can tell, we usually mark the pumps, but just so that you know from me having also told you, is that the terminal closest to the fuel outlet on the pump is the positive, and the terminal further away is the negative on these connectors. Obviously same on the other pump. So we ran it to a terminal strip. It was very convenient because we never wanted to splice wires if we don't have to. So a terminal strip is perfect. And then we ran just took a arbitrary red and a red with a white, and then a black and a black, and that's just pump 1, pump 2, and the grounds for it. And we ran that together with the heavier cable and ran that up front like that. So let's go and take a peek in front of, or basically inside the airplane, because we already talked about that grommet. And here's something different from what you're used to seeing with Viking. All right, we have a single battery. So what does that mean? Well, you can't have a single contactor to turn that battery on and off, because guess what? Contactors aren't 100% reliable. So when we have dual batteries, we have dual contactors. Gives us a backup. So we decided we're going to go absolutely manual with a high quality battery switch, which now controls the main power of the airplane. In fact, it turns the engine off when you turn it off. So what you've got is a nice switch here. It has a built-in voltmeter, and that kind of lets you know that it's on. You do have to run, after you run the heavy battery cable through it, the 2 posts underneath, you have to run a little ground wire back to it from your ground bus in order to get actual power to it, so that the light works. But that's that. So, and then we put some loom on some other wires, and we just fed it right underneath here so that it can't touch anything. And that's our fuel pump wiring. And obviously, eventually there'll be a little channel in the middle of the plane here to house all this. And we always put a couple of ADL clamps here. Once this is tightened down, it's a nice channel to run any kind of like conduit right through the middle of these airplanes. And then we came up and through our shelves. Now, let's talk about this shelf. This is a 701, so it's a little bit different in some small ways. Like, there is no steel tube across here. There's just a panel with a bent bottom, and that's what you got. So we didn't really need anything super structural here, because the panel comes down and has a bend, and that bend, the design of that bend and the panel makes this very strong down here. But we needed something so that we can take the panel out, or even as something like building this in the first place. So what we did is we notched a panel out here, and we notched it over there. So now the panel lays underneath here all the way across. We use an 1/8 inch by 1 inch wide, just aluminum bar and a rivet on each side. You can get that at Home Depot or McMaster-Carr. And then just put that in, and then we can put something in here that allows us to mount things that, otherwise, where would you mount all this stuff? So now we have our universal tray in here. We have 2 different trays that Viking has, provide in our store. And one is the universal, like perforated like this. You can mount anything anywhere. Sometimes the holes don't line up perfect, so you might have to add a hole and all that. But then we have another one that's more designed for people that are doing the dual batteries underneath here and all that. So we didn't need that, so we went with the universal one. We offset it to the side a little bit because we installed the heater over here. So we'll talk about the heater afterwards. The panel you see here is our traditional switch panel. other than that we had to redo some things. All right, we took our 25 amp from here and we moved it up here. So this now goes with this. This we're going to draw a line here because the aux here now is for this 5 amp breaker. We just ended up using the same panel. So if you draw a line here to the aux, then that goes with those three. So you can run lightweight stuff on there. Now, these were still very useful because they're got the 5 amp breakers, and we put a bus bar on the back of that, and we were able to use power from our, as you see in our wire diagram, we were able to use power from the engine bus prior to the 30 amp fuse to power these 3 circuits, which is the fuel pump, and alternator with a respectable 5 amp, 5 amp, and 5 amp, and then the 25 amp for cranking the engine. Now, looking behind here, we see that all of us work our way all the way from the back and go forward. So right at the firewall, we have, let's say here, we have our grounding lug that goes right through the heavy section of the firewall in between the engine mount. So we remove some paint there, use star washers, put a nut on each side, and got a really good ground, and also it provides a through ground as well as a chassis ground on that one. And then those grounds, you have this wire here, about a 14 gauge or so, I think it is, and that provides the ground bus for the whole airplane right here. You can ground anything to that. Now, Builder's also going to put avionics in this airplane, so he will put another panel maybe from here over to here, and rather than then just keep piggybacking on these crucial ground buses and power buses for the airplane, you can now run a single wire from one of these over to that area and put another one that will be for your airframe. So back to the engine side, which this would be the engine tray, and then, but you can obviously use a wire from any one of these and bring it over there so that you can also do your avionics and so forth, lights, everything. This ground right here is the one we talked about before. So that comes all the way from the battery, and it provides then a path for the ground to have a clean ground for the airplane. And then we have yet another ground right here, and that's just a ground that goes to that primary switch down here that we looked at in order to turn on the light when we turn power on. Of course, that could come from our grounding bus too. It wouldn't have to come from that big lug. So that's the ground. So far we have grounded a fuel pump and another fuel pump, and that's really it as far as what we've grounded for the engine. And a third one here too, which was the ground for the relay, the starter relay, the black wire from the starter relay. So 3 grounds total for the engine. All other grounds are on the engine for the electronics that will operate and run the engine. Now let's talk about the heavy cable that ran in the tube from the back and run through this switch and then go up the firewall there. That one goes to the power pass-through. The power pass-through, of course, is the plastic one with the steel inserted so that it doesn't touch the firewall. And you want to make sure that nothing touches the firewall. You know, you want to make sure that your mounting hardware for it doesn't touch this. So it's got to be insulated from the firewall. You have a big giant spark. So that goes all the way up there, and then we have to tee off of that because we can't just crank and start the engine, which is what that heavy cable is for. There's no other reason for a heavy cable like that in an airplane like this. We tee off of that, and we go down to this rear bus there. And you see with the 4 prongs on it, or studs. That is the engine bus. And I think we just wrote it down there. Yep, engine. And what is different between the engine and the airframe? Well, the engine one gets power first. Just look at all our other videos or our wiring diagram. So power comes in, bang. We got power directly from the battery. Battery's on, there's power. Now, that's also true for the bus, the airframe bus, this other one here. except there's a 30 amp fuse right here. There's the 30 amp. So from here to here is 30 amp. If you short something violently out on the airplane, you bust that 30 amp, you lose everything on the airplane, but guess what? Your engine's still running. All right, so that's what you want. 30 amps is what you get for the airplane. If that breaks, which will take a huge short and failures of all your other systems, all your other individual breakers and stuff, then that's the only time that it would fail, and it would save the engine side of the power so that the engine can continue to run. So we got power coming in on the engine bus. We have power going out from the engine bus in order to power up our switch panel. So on this side of the switch panel, there is a wire going in, and that's what that one is. And that powers all this stuff here. You know, it powers the breakers and the switches for, it doesn't power the aux side. We made sure we cut it, so it's only powers from here over, and the starter. The aux has to get its own separate power input to this 5 amp breaker right here. We don't want to mix airframe and engine. So then we have the third one back there, which is the ECU power. So ECU power, there are 2 wires, a white and a red with white. They go here. So 3 wires for powering up the engine. Main power coming in from the airframe, hot all the time when the big giant knob down here, the red knob to turn it on, is on. Powering up the switch panel for the engine and power the ECU. Moving up to the airframe, nothing's really done there. Like I said about the ground, you don't really want to use this just to pile on a whole bunch of stuff for the airframe either. You could do a couple of things. You are already on the 30 amp on the protected side, but you might want to use it for, running individual wires to different buses over here in your avionics area, so that you're just tapping off of there to run different fuse panels or whatever, or power buses for avionics and lights and your beep beep horn, when you land off field with your 701. So that's that. Now, moving up even closer to the switch panel, we have all the wires coming in from the ECU. So ECU's right here, and there's always some wires coming off the ECU. We got this guy, and he is a 9-pin DB9, and we just coil that up and have it accessible somewhere so you can get to it from underneath, so that if we ever come and visit you, you can put a laptop in there and see what's going on with your engine. Then there's like 5 or so other wires, and those you bring in to this area. And of course, we talked about the ECU power, the main power right there. It's very critical. And then there's like 5 others or so. One's your tack, one's your alternator field, your starter wire, and then there's some from the back of the airplane. We talked about that we had used red and red with white, and that's for the fuel pumps right here. And then we go off of the other side and we do the same thing. Now we're actually wiring up to the back of our switch panel, and we have to do that because we have a switch for the alternator, and we have the key switch for the starter, and that comes off the solenoid right there. There's a diagram of how to wire that solenoid, but basically it's the yellow is the starter. It goes to the starter coming in from the ECU, and the black goes to the ground bus, and the red that's in the middle gets cut off, and the white, I believe, goes to the starter terminal on the switch, and the blue goes to the battery side, along with power. So that's the setup that we have in here for you to be able to, do this, and it's very simple. You're also going to mount the ECU. We just decided to put it up on top here. We use tie wraps. We want to be able to remove it if we ever had to, if there was a software upgrade or we wanted to send it back for any updates or anything. So that's very accessible right there. Builder's going to use the frame of the original panel to stiffen this all out, and then just cut out, have modular sections so you can get back in here. You want to be able to get to this. As far as the electrical up here. There's nothing really else. We're gonna move forward and we can take a look ahead of the firewall and see what kind of electrical stuff was done up there. Of course, the harness comes with your engine, so it's already on the engine. So your wiring is very minimal. You're going to route your cable from the engine through the firewall pass-through that's sold by Viking, and put some silicone that comes with that as well through to take up the extra slack. Other than that, you're going to be doing the grounding and battery terminal through the firewall. So we've got our grounding strap with a 8mm bolt and with a 10mm bolt over here. Very flexible grounding straps, and they go to a grounding stud that is, you know, it doesn't have any plastic on it, and it just has star washers, and it goes through this heavy section of the airplane, and paint is removed and so forth. And then you saw the inside a second ago. So that gives us a dual ground here on a big lug right there, and then that carries back to the battery through the 10 gauge. That also provides a clean ground for your avionics, and then it also carries through the airframe for the starting of the engine. Then over here we ran the alternator, and we used flexible welding cable there. So it's very, very flexible cable, a lot of strands in it, and that enables it also, like the same as with the grounding strap, the way it's built internally, to flex and not break when it goes onto a combustion engine that vibrates all the time. So you've got one from the alternator. We just used the same 6 gauge on that, same as the 6 gauge on the starter. Probably the alternator could be a little bit lighter, and then the starter's right there. It's always nice to do that one before, you know, you get the intercooler and everything on there. It's just easier to get to. Also keep in mind that it's very easy. It's just a couple of bolts here. If you ever wanted to just pull the intake manifold off, it takes you all of 5 minutes, and this whole assembly can just kind of hang down by the throttle cables basically. So then when you do this, like we talked about inside, make sure that nothing is exposed as far as the way that the hardware can't touch it, your wrenches can't touch it, and all that. It needs to be totally isolated from the airplane. And that's your wiring. As far as instrumentation, that'll be a different chapter. Let's talk about instrumentation of this engine. So you have an engine monitor either from Viking or Dynon or Garmin or whatever you have, and what you will do, since it's a turbocharged engine, you will have a probe that measures temperature of the hot gases from the turbocharger into the intercooler, and then you will see how effective the intercooler is with another probe on the exit side. So that's your before and your after. So you want to measure those two, and then like on other engines, you want to put a probe in for your gearbox, and you want to put one in for your coolant, and you want to do oil pressure as well. A lot of times a remote oil pressure, like a short piece of like a one, and we have that available, like a 1 or 2 feet of braided line between that, and then mount the transducer somewhere else, like with a bracket or something. Even though there is also enough room, if your transducer is rated for a little bit of vibration, you could put it directly into the engine as well. And that's it for instrumentation, other than that there's a tack wire coming off the ECU that you can use for your tachometer, and you would need a 1K pull-up resistor on that, shown on our diagrams. And then, of course, there's a fuel pressure transducer in the back of the airplane. You screw that in and wire it to your instrumentation as well. Now, as far as parameters, yeah, you can look at our website. The engine should run, you know, below 220 degrees. Your intake temperature on the turbocharger shouldn't exceed about 350 Fahrenheit. Engine temperature going into the engine should be 100 or like 85 to 130. Look at our instrument on our store for parameters for this engine. Then you got oil pressure is just normal, up to 100, no less than 20. The fuel pressure. It's a high pressure engine, so this bumps it up. The mechanical pump, it's a direct injected engine, but as far as what you're concerned with is the pressure from the tanks going to the high pressure pump. You want 40 to 50 there all the time. That takes care of the instrumentation of the engine. How about if you're cold and you need a heater? So let's talk about the heating system that you have if you buy the Viking heater. You would then tap off hot coolant from down in here. Let's take that plug out and put a fitting in with a 3/8 barb. It's a quarter MPT and 3/8 barb, and it's actually kind of easy to get to, like right through here. Sometimes I'll put a 90, a brass 90 right here using Oetiker clamps, because you want to make sure that all the stuff that goes behind here, it's all tucked in. Your wiring, your hoses, everything, because you have a throttle valve that goes up and down here. So use a clamp back in here, tie it all to the engine block, use tie wraps, just keep it tight to the engine so that the throttle can freely move up and down. So that's the hot side of your coolant, and then you have a return. We'll talk about it in a second. So as you can see, the hose for the hot side just goes right through here. Now the return of the heater goes to the coolant pump area, which is right here. So you can just put, another quarter NPT by 3/8 barb and a Oetiker 17 millimeter, I believe, Oetiker clamp there, or the screw clamps that are supplied, and that will be the return for the hot coolant for your heater. We have a T put in this one. We're just going to use a brass T's from now on because we don't, not so many parts, just a single piece. But what that is for your turbocharger. Your turbocharger has a hose coming off of it when you receive the engine, and then that would go back to the suction side or the pump side of the engine. We'll talk a little bit more about cooling in a second. But the heater is then, as you can see, there's a couple of bolts right here through the firewall. So you can use a piece of paper or something and rub that on the face of the heater so you can locate those. Be aware, and we kind of almost made that mistake, the heater bolts are different from one side to the other. So you got mounting holes here and you got mounting holes on the other side. And we made a template of the holes on this side, but the other side, the holes are a little bit lower or higher. So just keep that in mind when you're doing it. And then just screw it to the firewall like we did with those two outside bolts. We did decide to mount it over the pilot's feet here. And we also made it so that we could put two 90s here. Those are 3/8 brass 90s. And we could run the hoses sideways and then through the firewall. It just makes it easier for any kind of maintenance to have a little bit of hose in here rather than trying to line everything up dead on to the heater. And that worked out good. So then we have the plastic grommets in the firewall for the hoses to run through. And then you just follow the wire diagram and wire up the switch the way that it's called for. So you have a 3-position rotary switch for the fan and plenty of heat. There it is. All right, how about cooling system? We need to cool the engine. So let's kind of work our way from the big stuff, which is a radiator. Now, as you can see, it's very similar to our other airplanes. One difference, and we haven't really completed it yet, we're going to continue these up right into the bottom of the cowling for a nice look. But again, fun airplane, want some weight back, a lot of power up front. So we moved the radiator back. As you can see, we're like right here by the rear landing gear. And that worked out absolutely perfect. We lined it up right at the last rivet there, and we closed it up in the back with the piece that we now have available. We had to make a special cutout for the new Zenith channel there for the brake lines. But other than that, all stock stuff. A little trimming around there to make it all fit. And found a way where we hardly hit any rivets in the floor. It worked out real nice. We bent the front end just a little bit to clear the angles here. Just kind of pushed that in a little bit. So we just cleared that and put a screw in there as well. and it turned out real nice. So there's the cooling system, all aluminum radiator, and much further back, or about, as you can see, probably a solid 2 feet further back than the 750 to get weight aft in the airplane. So you do a 90 here, like plastic 90 like we supply, and one over there, and then we got some pieces, aluminum tubing, made a 90 here, and basically came straight up along that engine mount, made another 90. We're gonna put a little bit of sealer underneath here. I see that's laying on it. We're gonna do that right now. And then we ran stainless steel behind the turbocharger, very important. So that's stainless steel, and we put a little piece of just slip the piece of hose on the outside of that where it was touching the coolant lines of the turbo. And we did another one here. We just kind of slide those on ahead of time, anywhere where it's close to the engine. And then this piece comes with a 90-degree bend and a barb, and then a short 90 right here. And that tucks it in right nice and tight. That's the hot side. We don't have a thermostat anywhere on this engine. We might add one in the future, but for now there's a thermostat, no thermostat on this engine. And we rather see a baffle in the radiator system, very simple, and that could be done in this airplane with just a little lever inside here, because the opening of the radiator is right here, right underneath. So we haven't played with that, but maybe one day we will. We'll put a little baffle there to regulate and slow down the air going in there in the cold days and winter and so forth. Now the other side, similar. We've got the radiator, and as soon as we clear the firewall, we do a very sharp 90, and then a 3-inch piece, connector piece. Then we do a 90 the opposite direction towards me, another 3-inch connector piece. Then we do another 90 coming forward with a 6-inch piece. And then we are utilizing a different style thermostat housing, even though it has no thermostat in it, that has a 90-degree machine piece built into it. And we cap that off like that, and that just clears the cowling on the bottom. And that's the cooling system. Now, you will fill the coolant right here. It takes about two gallons, almost 2 gallons, not quite. You're gonna have a little bit left over. So we fill it here, screw a funnel on, tape it off, put some rags, and just fill it. It fills really, really quick, which means the cooling system is working really well, burps really well. And then once that's done, you cap that off with a little sealer on the threads, and then you're gonna be servicing the cooling system from the bottle after that. There's a little vent hole in the O of the bottle, and then your hose for that just kind of runs right here, and you run it behind the manifold right here, and it goes up here and it comes in here. And for these little tiny hoses, these spongy hoses, we don't use them for oil, but they're great for coolant. We put just a tie wrap on it, a black tie wrap, and that's it for sealing that off. So that's your cooling system on the Viking 140 baby turbo on this 701 airplane. So how are you going to throttle it up? Well, this airplane ended up with a dual throttle, so we have a 5-footer and a 6-footer. We take the locking out of this side so that nobody on this side can like screw this. We take the little plastic thing out and we tighten that so that this becomes a non-friction locking throttle, and we still have the friction left over here, just as a safety. Now, we ended up using these existing brackets that we had, and we bent them and put a stainless steel rivet on 2 of them and put the cables in there. So that's one way to do it. You know, you can make something off the panel or whatever, but that's what we did here. And then we routed them right through there, like just to the left side of the engine mounting bolt on both sides. You can see that right there. We drill about, I think it's about 3/8. That gets all the guts of the cable through. And then you can put a piece of loom back through afterwards, and that seals the hole. Then this cable on the pilot side, we ran it across the back of the engine. So we have all nice even bends and went across, and they kind of tied together back here of the same length. The other one came out up here, and we went down behind the intercooler like that, and they both kind of came together here and here. And the dual throttle thing is a little bit complicated. There's no way to make it super simple, but it works. It works slick as can be, but it takes a little bit to get it perfected. Throttle goes on the inside here, on the second hole from the end here, and screws go on the bottom here. Those are threaded in. They make studs basically. Then you put one washer and a catch horseshoe thing, and then a washer and a nut, and then the second one, piggyback, make sure it gets in that little groove there for security, and then some smaller nuts or you're going to run out of thread, and that holds the cables in place so you can make this all work. The idle screws right here, you set it there, you turn it there to set it, and you lock it right there. So that takes care of the throttle installation on the Turbo 701. How about the exhaust on the, well, you have to make a hole in the cowling because it slants back. You might need quite a elongated hole, but don't worry about stuff like that. You want the bottom of the cowling open as much as you can to get all this heat from the turbocharger out. That's important. There's no provision for like a support for these engines because the cowling stops right here. So once you start flying, you can actually reduce this length quite a bit, have it stick out maybe a couple of inches, and that keeps the propeller from pounding on it, and it should not crack. But still, inspect this in the beginning and yearly as you keep flying. This can rotate, and it's based on the tension of this bolt here. Sometimes too, by leaving this slightly loose, you're not transmitting as much vibration into the pipe as you would if everything is totally rigid. That's one trick to keep it lasting longer. The turbocharger itself has an oil feed from here, goes in here, has an oil drain from here, and drains back to here. Very critical components, protecting that hose from this hot heat here, and making sure that this is high-grade hose with the proper clamps. And even though it's just a gravity feed, it's one of the more important pieces of this whole installation, making sure that that's always intact and doing good as far as transferring that oil from the turbocharger back to the block. There's coolant going to the turbo. There's one exiting the engine right up in here. So right there is coolant. It goes aft, and there's a hose on it, and it goes right into the turbocharger right there. And then there's coolant leaving the turbocharger right here. It's all silicone hoses because it gets hot in there, and that goes back, and we teed that one back here from the heater return back to the coolant pump assembly. Here's your pressure relief, your turbocharger actuator. Super important that this clamp and this hose is in good shape right here. That blows the turbocharger open when you reach 15 pounds of boost in order to save the engine. So that needs to be intact and properly working. So you should be seeing like 60 to 65 inches of manifold pressure when you fly this engine. Once in a while, if the engine gets loud, like yearly, or you're starting to lose boost or RPM or whatever, keep an eye on your exhaust gaskets. Exhaust gaskets are critical in these engines. If you start blowing off a lot of steam here, exhaust, you have less for the turbocharger. It's a clear indication that you need to take these 4 screws off and just put another gasket on. And we're also investigating improved gasket material for this engine. At the top of the turbocharger, very critical, these hoses and all these bends and everything going into the intercooler. There's going to be a scoop available for this intercooler that will glue to the sides here, and it will come out and it will face forward, and that'll get you air through your intercooler installation for the max of 130 Fahrenheit that we talked about earlier. Same gearbox as other engines, very sturdy. Gearbox needs 10 ounces of oil. That'll be above the sight glass, but the sight glass is mostly there to see the quality and condition of the oil. You're going to have a probe in the gearbox to measure its temperature, 14 millimeter hex here, to put 10 ounces of oil. Change the oil every hour for the first 10 hours, and thereafter at 25 hours. And that's to keep the gearbox nice and clean during break-in, and then for thorough inspection during times after that. There's a magnetic drain plug down here. All gearboxes should now have an X on them. That's the latest and greatest from Viking as far as gearboxes. If you ever were to remove the gearbox, very, very, very important that the torsion dampening assembly is in good shape. And also there's a part called a centering bushing. So the centering bushing aligns this perfectly on the crankshaft. It's made out of plastic. It's an alignment tool that stays with the engine. If you ever take the gearbox off and you put it back on, even if you ran it for 5 minutes, you don't care. You need a new centering bushing, so maybe keep a few in your drawer for your specific engine. So how are you going to get this thing up and running? Well, you've got it all done. Every wire, everything, all that. Well, you have to turn the power on. But before you get to that, make sure that, number one, you have 1 3/4 or so gallon. You have 4, not quite 5 quarts, and not 4, so let's say 4.5 quarts of oil in this engine. You have to use this 5W30. You also have to have this Dexos brand, or it has to be a Dexos approved oil, and that's a must for this engine. Lots of oils have that. Look for that 530 and that Dexos symbol. All right, make sure that's in the engine. Otherwise it will be a short unhappy 5 minutes. Then 10 ounces, 9 to 10, no more than 10. So if you more is not better. More is just more heat in the gearbox. 9 to 10, we aim for 10, but no more than 10. The sight glass will read full and more than full when you have 10 ounces in there. The coolant system. Fill your cooling system. That's where I came with the 2 gallons. Okay, it's almost 2 gallons that you're going to fill in through here. After that, that gets capped, and you're servicing on the cap down here on this bottle. There should be a sticker that says no water. There's no water ever in this system, just Evans coolant. That's all we use. There's no pressure cap, there's no pressure in the system. If you use water, it'll blow everywhere. So Evans coolant is what we use, and it's an open system, open to the atmosphere. After that, you're gonna, crank the engine a little bit with the ignition off. Take your air cleaner off. Maybe put a little rubber elbow on here. Pour a few drops of gas in there. I usually, and be careful with this, I'll hold my hand over it a little bit, kind of choke the engine to draw that fuel up through the hoses and through the intercooler. It's a long ways to go into the engine to fire it off the first time. And that's after you have taken this hose off and bled some air from the system. You can buy, it's for a GM engine, you can get it at any auto parts store. It's a tool that when you push this down, there's a little play in here, see? You push it this way, the tool has prongs that go up inside. You take this off first, just flip this over and pull this little thing out. I don't know what it's for, it's some kind of little safety catch. But flip this over, pull this down, take this catch off, then push this down, take that tool, the clamshell tool, close it over here and push it up inside here while you push this way. It'll go up inside, and now you can pull this straight off. You don't want to do that without a rag around it when there's already pressure there, but if the pumps are off and it's a new engine, there won't be any pressure. Now turn your fuel pumps off, have somebody put this in the bucket, and make sure you can prime both fuel pumps, and prime that hose and get fuel from both pumps. And then quickly put some silicone lube on there, O-ring lube, and pop this back on and rotate this thing until those prongs go up in there and lock it. And that primes the fuel system. And then if you do the same thing over here, you take the filter off, put a little tube on there, and you put a little gas in there, and you prime that with your hand, and you just suck it through, then the engine will fire right up. As soon as it starts sputtering and going, then you're home free. So, you know, crank for like 3, 4, 5 seconds at a time, and eventually she'll come up and go. If the idle is not set correctly, it might never start, so that's kind of a little bit hard to know exactly where to set your idle for the first start. But, you know, and here's your idle screw. You got your lock and your actual idle setting right there. But you can always crack it open slightly with the throttle in the airplane and try to get it started. And then once you get it started, you can set it out here. Now, of course, the final idle is never set until you're all done. You know, you got your prop on, the engine's warm, you're happy with the way it's running, and then you listen to the engine and you can reduce or adjust the idle appropriately so it sounds good. All right, that takes care of the prep before the first startup. Now, it's fun to fly without cowlings, and you don't really need them, but also, most people do want them. Here's what we did. We have patterns for these. We don't use the original look of the nose of the airplane, like tucking this in like this. It's nice for a little 582 stroke, two-stroke and stuff. But when you have an engine with 140 horsepower in the front, okay, it's not that the engine is big. It's actually quite a tiny little engine. But I don't personally like the look of it. It goes in and in like that, and then you have to come back out again to clear the engine. So to make it clean, in our opinion, and the way we're doing things, is we square those corners off, which is exactly like they did on the Super Duty airplane. The difference between a 750 and a 750 Super Duty is, as far as a visible front and with a bigger engine, is that exact same thing. They squared off the bottom corners like that. All right, so now when you do that, it enables us to keep a clean line from the back, underneath the door, and all the way to the firewall. And in fact, now the cowling also continues on with that same line instead of a whole lot of changes in. And then when we're all done, said and done, the bottom too, for the radiator, will also blend into the cowling. So now, the cowlings, we fitted those. First we put these on. Existing rivet line. The only one you have to add is one down here, okay? It's basically from that point, and it just goes right to until it hits right there. And like I said, we have templates for these, so they're super easy to do. We added a little 90-degree zenith angle here to stiffen the side, and we put the hinge in between that. On the other side where the intercooler is, we did exactly the same, but we bent that piece a little bit just to get a bit more room for the intercooler. See, so we went past 90 on that one, gave us a little bit more room for the intercooler. And talking about intercooler, yeah, we're gonna have a scoop for that, and that's gonna interfere with the cowling hinge here, so we have to shorten the hinge a little bit. We haven't done that on this airplane yet, so I can't show you. Now, at that point, it's pretty easy to fit the bottom cowling. Step one is to take and leave about 3 inches, 2.5 to 3 inches in the belly, all the way around, and cut that out. That's gonna allow you to and then take the exhaust off. That makes it a lot easier to get started with the cowling. Then lift the cowling off, and that'll get you right in position almost immediately. Take your spinner bulkhead and put it up here, 13 inches, or make a wooden pretend of that. We have cowling videos that show all that. And then, you know, you can make a wooden one, and then on the back of the wood, you put like a 1/4 inch ring because you want a little bit of room between the cowling and the propeller. And then you can screw your cowling to that that ring. Now you got a place where you can use sheetrock screws and screw your cowling to it if you use wood. Now let's put the cowlings on, or the bottom on, and we'll talk a little bit about that once we get it in place. All right, so now we got the cowling on. So here's what I'm talking about. Not looking at the bottom, you see the look continues all the way back to the landing gear. Nice and straight line. A little different, but just what it is. And then we're gonna connect the oil pan area box to the radiator. So that'll all be connected. Now, it's a very short cowling. We haven't trimmed the front yet, but there's room for the gearbox right here. There's not much room, but there is room. Now, by taking out the bottom, as you can see from the side, you don't even see that, but it gives a lot of cooling to the bottom of such a utility type of airplane, where you want to dump as much air out of the cowling as you can, as quickly as you can, when you're hanging on the prop, doing your stall takeoffs and landings and being in the woods and all that kind of stuff. So you want to get rid of the heat. This is a good way to do it, is to have the bottom of the cowling open and the oil pan is exposed like that. From the side, it's completely hidden, so you don't even see that at all. The hinges, we put hinges. We were able to make them all the way around the corner. It's difficult to do. We ended up having to go with a smaller hinge pin, and we struggle a little bit. So another way to do it, if you want, is you stop your hinge somewhere around here. Then you can take aluminum pieces, and you can, like, if you can basically just make a lip here, so that whichever cowling wants to pop out is where you put the lip, so that it keeps it in. So you can make a lip and not have a hinge, and it just kind of keeps them aligned. And then, of course, you could also put a 1/4 inch screw or something out here if you had to. But that's another way to do it. We struggled. We were able to do it. We can get the pins in, but it wasn't the easiest thing we have ever done. But now we're going to put the top on, and you get to see. Now, this is a mod that we do to the engine. We put a plate on here. We remove a protrusion that sticks up here, and we do that on the 701 because very small airplane, and we need the streamlining. So let's put the top cowling on, take a peek, and see what it looks like. And there's the final look, other than connecting the cowling to the radiator, which we're going to do. But we like it. And then, of course, it'll have that nice 13-inch spinner. It's a straight look from there to there. And it's a nice look on the top from the glare shield all the way through. So it just looks like it fits the airplane without it bulging out, top or bottom or anything. And then there'll be a 13-inch spinner, like I said, which will be really nice. There's the front look on it. With the 13-inch spinner, it fits nicely on the top. We do have 2 different lengths of engine mounts. This is the long one, so sometimes because it's different heights and stuff, you might have to take a little bit of that filler and just fill in a little bit around here before you paint. On the top, it's really, really good. And that's just because the angle of the cowling changes depending on the length of the airplane. But that's it.